I don't understand the fear.
There's a strong
we've got a quorum. Okay, please note that this meeting is being made available to the public through an audio recording, which we'll use to ensure an accurate record of proceedings produced in the minutes of the meeting. All comments made in open session will be recorded. PAC TV is providing this service live on Comcast Xfinity Government Access Channel 9. Those without cable visit YouTube for live streaming. And this is the planning board meeting of December 2nd, 2024. So we've got minimal agenda items tonight. And first up is a meeting with Carolyn Murray, KP Law, and discussion of revising zoning bylaws. And we've got two that we're looking at. And come up and talk to us about what we need to do.
Shall we take, so good evening, members of the board. Hope you all had a good Thanksgiving. As the chair said, for the record, my name is Carolyn Murray from KP Law, your town council. Shall we take up the ADU first? Because I suspect that's where the most questions will be.
Yes, I think it will.
Okay, all right. And I assume Susan Mayo got a copy of the draft, right?
Yes.
Okay. So let me just go over a few things just to begin with. The legislation was passed in August that provided for accessory dwelling units by right and set a particular definition on the size of the ADU, that it has to be either 50% of the gross floor area of the principal dwelling or 900 gross square feet maximum. So whichever is smaller of those two numbers is the maximum limit. It also allowed the municipality to place any sort of reasonable restrictions on those ADUs, including if we want to prohibit them from being used as short-term rentals. Some communities that's a real problem, so that might be something you want to consider. The part of the statute about actually regulating ADUs, however, doesn't take effect until August 2nd of 2025, which is really inconvenient time for most towns.
I thought it was February 2nd.
I'm sorry, what did I say?
You said August.
Okay, it was passed in August, it takes effect February, thank you. Really inconvenient because you're still several months out from your annual town meeting. So if the full effect of the statute takes effect on February 2nd, and you don't have a town meeting until sometime in May, you've got 3 months where you might have a bylaw in place that can't really be enforced because now it's in conflict with state law. There are other communities that are starting to amend their bylaws sooner than February 2nd. The danger of that, of course, is that the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities has told us verbally that they do plan to issue regulations on ADUs. We don't know when those regulations will come out. We don't know what those regulations will say. We are certainly offering our comments to them or raising questions that we hope they'll consider when they actually draft the regulations. But some communities are thinking that perhaps they should just wait, see what the regulations say, because if we amend our bylaw too quickly, we might be back having to amend the bylaw again if the regulations come out and we've done something that conflicts with it. So that's just a little bit of background as you think about this going forward.
Now, they're also planning on promulgating the law as they go as well?
Yes, so we're only allowed, we are not allowed as a municipality to have any sort of a bylaw that conflicts with state law. So when this entirely takes effect in February 2nd, if our bylaw conflicts with it, and I'll talk to you a little bit about how your current bylaw does, we won't be able to enforce our existing bylaw.
Okay.
So the state law, the Affordable Homes Act, it allows, as we said, an ADU by right. It can be attached or detached, so it could be in an accessory dwelling. It could be in an accessory structure. It could be in a new shed type structure that you put in your backyard. Versus right now, your current zoning bylaw, you allow an attached ADU. So we'll have to think about modifications to also allow a detached ADU. Your current bylaw allows an ADU by special permit. We have to allow the state-defined ADU by right. Your current zoning bylaw defines your ADU as either being 50% of the gross floor area of the single-family house or 800 square feet. The state law doesn't change that very much, except that it's still 50% gross floor area of the principal dwelling or 900 square feet. So there's a little bit of a size discrepancy there. Your current zoning bylaw allows an ADU to be restricted to being owner occupied. The state law does not allow any restriction on that. It also, the state law uses some interesting terminology where they say that an ADU has to be allowed by right in any single-family residential zoning district. That doesn't mean that you have to call your zoning district your single-family residential district, and in fact, most communities don't have something called the single-family residential zoning district. It means anywhere where you allow a single-family use by right, that is where an ADU will now also be allowed by right.
Okay, so I have a question specific to that. So our Business B zone allows a business, various uses, or any use allowed in Residence A.
As does,
But
yes.
not both. But
Right.
not both at the same time.
Okay. And you also allow, well, you sort of have like this, almost like a pyramid effect. You start off with everything that's allowed in Residence A, and then residential commercial also allows that and builds on it or restricts it. Business B and Business A do the same thing. So if you want to consider making sure that a by right ADU is not allowed, say, in the Business B zone, we've got to amend the bylaw to make sure that it doesn't allow a single-family house as well.
So it wouldn't allow anything allowed in Residence A in addition to uses allowed in Business B?
Right, or something to that effect, yes.
I mean, I'm not sure why would we want to restrict that?
We still restrict mixed use.
Well, we wouldn't be able to restrict mixed use in that case, it sounds like, because if you're allowing an ADU, that's a dwelling unit, and you'd be allowing mixed use.
But if we don't allow mixed use, if you have it as a commercial property, then you can't have the ADU. But if it was a residence, you could have the ADU.
But if you're
right?
allowing ADUs, you have to allow them by right.
But the ADU by definition is accessory to a principal dwelling. So it
Okay.
is not going to apply in mixed use because the principal use is commercial.
Gotcha.
And we don't say that an accessory dwelling unit is,
Good catch.
yeah. It was.
Sorry, I've done my research.
So what is before you this evening is just very much a first draft with really some questions for the board to think about what you want to do going forward. So the proposal amends your definitions section to add the state definition of an ADU. It then goes on to amend the use regulations or uses allowed in the Residence A district to incorporate, any reasonable restrictions that we want to place on a by right ADU. These are just some that, in part looking at your existing bylaw and in part looking at, I've probably drafted about a dozen of these since the state law was passed, so picking, borrowing from some other communities for some ideas of things that you might want to regulate. You certainly don't have to, and there might be some others that you think of and say, oh, we want to make sure that this is added in. You could just allow an ADU by right and put no restrictions on it whatsoever. That's entirely up to the board. But everything here that you see as a proposal in section 1A5 is entirely up to your discretion. One thing that I will point out is in paragraph E is where I put in that no ADU shall be used as a short-term rental. If that's important to the town, or if you have problems with short-term rentals, there's some folks who feel that ADUs should be to provide more long-term and I'm going to say affordable in quotes, it's not, deed restricted, but a more affordable option for people to live in. It shouldn't be an opportunity for people to, rent their house out and make, money all summer long or whatever it happens to be. It should be more of a commercial venture. But that's really for the board to think about.
That seems to be the most basic restriction. What other restrictions are towns looking at?
So some are considering things such as, what are your setbacks? If it is an attached ADU, we would assume that the attached ADU is going to have to meet the same setbacks as the principal structure. But then some towns have a different, lesser setback for accessory structures. But there are folks who feel, well, let's say that the accessory structure setback is 5 feet. Well, you might be fine with a passive use like a shed or a garage being 5 feet off the property line, but you might feel a little bit differently if now there's an ADU above that garage with somebody having, a big picture window and a balcony that now looks out into, your backyard. So there's some thought being given to imposing greater setbacks on detached ADUs. Some towns are considering use of site plan review. Even though it's a by right use, they want to have some sort of say in the design and placement of the ADU. I've got one town that has, two towns that are considering, they want site plan review for the detached structure, but they don't care about site plan review for the attached structure. They see different impacts in terms of things like, light trespass, noise, things that, where the parking space is going to be, that type of thing. Some other thoughts that I'm seeing is some design components enter into this. Folks want the ADU to sort of look like a single-family house or be in keeping with the characteristics of a single-family house. And they might put some parameters around that. Then there's the usual things like screening. Do you want certain height of vegetation along property lines, especially if the ADU is going to be in a detached accessory structure where it might actually be closer to adjoining property lines. So those are the kinds of things.
Well, don't they have to comply with the existing setbacks?
If you do nothing special for ADUs, yes, they would.
Okay, so they need to comply with our current setbacks.
Right.
And we don't have any reductions for accessory structures. Right.
No.
Like where some
Right.
towns have like, okay, you can be within 1 foot for a shed under X amount of square feet. And
Right.
Blah, blah, blah. We don't have any of that. So, I mean, our setbacks are pretty good.
Yeah, I wouldn't recommend changing that
Yeah.
for this.
How is power for the home and the ADU separated? How is water for the home and the ADU separated?
So the
How is
statute,
insurance coverage for the two properties?
all excellent
separated?
questions. So the statute doesn't address most of that. As far as, one thing that does come into play, obviously, is anything relative to Title V and septic systems, that the house, the principal structure, and the ADU combined, based on their, number of bedrooms, has to comply with Title V setbacks. So that might deter some people from putting in an ADU. But there is nothing said in the statute about separate utilities for water or electricity or insurance purposes. I would imagine that the insurance would all have to come under, one entity now, that, it's an accessory dwelling unit. So think about your bylaw currently allows an ADU of a different size by special permit. Your bylaw currently allows an affordable accessory apartment. How are those being insured? I imagine that it's all coming under the rubric of the principal homeowner's insurance policy. The only way I think you'd get into separate insurance would be if the accessory dwelling unit and the principal dwelling unit were condos and separate ownership. But I would argue you can't do that to an ADU because then it is no longer accessory to the principal dwelling. So I think the insurance question is, it's all covered by the principal homeowner's insurance. How they want to work that out in terms of rental payments to their tenant is up to them.
Fire, emergency access, ambulance, emergency access,
That's building code stuff, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's building code.
yeah.
That doesn't fall under us. And the state said, because I asked this question, which then they got back to me, that you can't condoize the ADUs.
That's sort of
You
a
can't subdivide the parcel without going through subdivision. It would have to fall under your subdivision control laws, which, so most ADUs are not gonna comply with that. So you cannot subdivide your property unless, like, you had enough frontage to meet your local zoning codes.
and still have a principal dwelling and an ADU. You do raise a good point, though, about like fire and emergency access, because you could envision a parcel where you've got a house and a garage, and maybe the ADU is detached and set back at some distance. If that's where the fire is, how is the fire truck getting in there? You know, are they now gonna cross over your patios and whatever you've got in your backyard to get to it? Well, yeah, they're gonna do what they need to do.
Are you gonna be held legally liable for not thinking that out by the tenant?
The town? No, the town will
The
not be
town?
liable for that, no. But it might be a reason to think about in terms of the bylaw, that if you've got, like, for example, one community I'm working with is saying that they don't want any ADUs allowed anywhere within the front setback. Well, that seems to make sense. You want it to sort of be to the side or behind the principal structure. But if it's so far behind the principal structure, and if that's tight to begin with, fire access might be something to consider in terms of when you look at your bylaw, do you want to put some kind of requirement in there? It could be something as simple as requiring that in order to get the building permit, they've got to demonstrate access to the satisfaction of the fire department, or do you want to put some sort of requirement in that the driveway to the ADU must be at least 16 feet wide or 12 feet wide, whatever you think it needs to be for a fire truck to get back there.
But that's why site plan review would be,
Site plan
helpful.
review would be helpful for that, yes. Yep,
because that could all be included in site plan and not have to be by statute.
right, right. Because without site plan review, you don't get that opportunity to look at it and make suggestions, but,
And
Yeah,
does-
so it's just
did
gonna
this-
cost the homeowners more.
Yeah. And did the state consider this at all around surface water and bodies of water? Like potentially, increasing this number of bedrooms and number of septics, potentially around drinking water ponds and stuff like that?
Drinking water, no, not explicitly. I mean, they did include in the statute that ADUs can be subject to, or have to comply with Title V for septic purposes. So it's gonna have to comply with the state requirements as well as whatever local Board of Health requirements you have. It's also gonna have to comply with any wetlands requirements that either the state imposes or the local bylaw requires. It doesn't really go to like water capacity, like do you have enough of a potable, water supply to allow for another ADU? No,
It doesn't go into increased runoff either
no.
from the increased development.
Nope, there's no stormwater runoff. However, if you had site plan review, you could look at that.
So does it allow for only one accessory dwelling unit, or are there allowed to be multiple?
So there's a difference of opinion right now, depending upon who you ask. I've gone to more webinars on this just because I want to hear what more people are saying or what questions they're asking. So there was if you ask the Mass Municipal Association, it is just one ADU that is allowed per lot. But there was a sentence that was thrown in that says more than one ADU shall be by special permit. So the question or the debate that we're having is, well, does that mean you must allow more than one ADU by special permit? Or does that mean if you choose to allow more than one ADU, you may require a special permit for that second ADU? I tend to think the proper interpretation is that if you choose to allow more than one ADU, that second ADU can be by special permit. But I will wait to see whether or not the HLC comes out with any regulations to that
And
effect.
that you would put into your bylaw.
Yes,
Can we make the bylaw restrictive to just one ADU
I think you can right now, yes.
for now and
Mhm.
see how this goes? and then-
I mean, if the regulations come back and say that we must allow more than one ADU by special permit, I think we can come back and revisit it. I would also think at that point, you really want to look at site plan review, or, changing your special permit requirements, because you probably want at least a minimum lot size. I can't imagine that you want 2 ADUs, a principal dwelling, a garage, a shed, and swimming pool on a 40,000 square foot lot. Or if you reduce your lot sizes, you're also thinking about, you don't want it on a smaller lot either. So I would say for now, until the state tells us otherwise, you don't have to require more than one ADU. If you do want to allow more than one ADU, it would be by special permit, and we can talk about some of those criteria that you might want to put in effect. So we've probably covered a lot of my questions for the board in all of this, because one of them was, do you want to allow more than one ADU? But if you go to page 2 of the draft, and really, this is everything that is either shaded in gray or highlighted, I'm not sure how it printed for you folks, but everything from paragraph 4 on, that's all from your existing zoning bylaw. And the question really becomes, do you want to keep this? Do you want to tweak it? And if so, how?
Was she given the tweaks that we had already previously come up with?
Yeah.
Where we wanted to
Yeah.
get rid of the
When we
word
first started-
existing
yeah.
as well?
When we first started talking about it, so you might not
I
have
was gonna
it
say,
now.
I went
Yeah.
by the 2024 version of the zoning bylaw, so maybe I am missing a few tweaks here or there. But paragraph 4 is your existing ADU by special permit, and that's the one where, it's limited in size to 50% of the gross floor area, or 800 square feet, whichever is less. That obviously
900.
doesn't make sense if an ADU by right could be as large as, say, 900 square feet. So do you want to keep an ADU by special permit? Do you want to get rid of this altogether? I will tell you that in some communities, they're amending the bylaw obviously to allow the ADU by right. But if they had an existing bylaw that allowed an ADU that was larger than 900 square feet, we're creating a new definition and calling it, ADU large, for lack of a better term, and allowing that ADU large to be obviously the larger size by special permit. So I think those two can easily coexist. But yours with the 800 square foot limit is going to be, I think, impractical, quite frankly, to keep, because who's going to want to go through the special permit process when they can get an ADU by right?
Right.
So that's one thought to consider, is whether or not you want to keep that. The other question then, as we get into paragraph 5 at the bottom of the second page, this is your affordable accessory apartments, with the deed restriction for 15 years that's in place. Do you want to keep that or do you not? In my opinion, that can coexist with an ADU by right, but really that's for the board's
I
consideration.
don't think there's any incentive to do it
Too much paperwork.
if you got it with the deed restrictions. I mean, there's no market incentive to do it when you've got something else much easier that you can do by right.
Absolutely. That's one reason why you might just want to decide, it was a great idea at the time, but It doesn't seem to have
And we haven't
much.
had any applications for it. And it's been in place for at least 15 years.
I'm still back to the existing part that we wanted to take out, because by saying existing, somebody building new construction can't build the ADU at the same time. And so I think that's, we had discussed it
Yes,
before,
gotcha.
about having that removed, because it says it in another section as well.
Yeah, there
Or
was
an
a one-year-
existing structure, existing dwelling,
I
rather
think
than.
there was a one-year moratorium,
Mhm.
and I do think that should go. People can build a brand-new home with the ADU in it,
Right, it's less
They could.
disruption
When
to
they've
the
got
neighborhood,
the whole
to
site-
do it all at once.
being worked on. That just makes more sense.
Here, I actually had one community, they said, but what if somebody comes in with a plan? They've got either a vacant lot, or they're gonna raise whatever the structure is on the lot, and they say they're gonna build a principal dwelling and an ADU, but they wanna start with the ADU first. And what happens if they don't actually build the principal dwelling? He said, then you just have a principal dwelling that is a small principal
Yeah.
dwelling on that lot.
Right.
You know, I think the likelihood of something like that happening is slim to none. Other folks are starting to think, okay, well, you're allowed, 50% gross floor area. So let's take that same ADU proposed with the new principal dwelling, and the new principal dwelling never gets built. But the ADU is 900 square feet. Now the ADU comes in and they want an ADU. Are you limited to 450 feet? So, well, yes, you are, but if somebody was smart about it, they'd put an addition on to that principal ADU first and then come back for an ADU. But there's only so many rabbit holes you can go down,
Yeah.
thinking about what people might do. We already talked about whether or not you want to allow more than one ADU on a lot, and that is, if we go to the last page, that would be where paragraph F begins. And just as a placeholder, I put the zoning board can grant a special permit for more than one ADU on a single lot in accordance, with the sections below. But again, you don't have to do that at all. We could take that out entirely and wait and see what the regulations ultimately say.
Well, what does the board think? What Heather thinks, right?
Yeah, I don't think we need more than one, at
I
least
agree with that.
initially, if there becomes a need for it, then I think we should revisit it, but I can't imagine we need to start there.
Okay.
But that's
What
my
do you guys
opinion.
think?
Yeah, I think it's a good start. I certainly think you wouldn't see it on a 1 acre lot where somebody were to start this so-called compound with multiple ADUs for their family to start moving into.
No.
So I think it's gonna be a rare instance. I think that's a good start. If we feel as though there's very few opportunities for anyone to do that, you could put it in there in case that one or two instance in town wants to, but
It also moves us away from requiring site plan, although detached ADUs kind of scream out for site plan. But, we could go either way on that. My feeling is I'm willing to go either way on that. See where things go.
It does require
on the
parking.
site plan for the one ADU,
For the detached.
detached.
With an attached, you
single
really
ADU.
wouldn't need it, but for a detached, you may because of some of the things Stefan
There were
brought up.
mentions, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and I hate to bring this up because I think differently. I'm an engineer. And
That's great.
because I'm an engineer, I kind of think differently, but what's the assumed impact of all of this on the town's population, tax base, traffic? We're sitting here talking about increasing what's happening in the town of Pembroke. Do we have any concept?
Yeah, well, you're increasing density, so you're definitely increasing people.
We don't have a say because the state's doing it.
Right.
I know that, I get that, but I mean.
The potential impact could be, there may be a car more on a lot because of that. It's definitely more people, it's more units, more resource use, hopefully more taxes to the town because of assessed value. Assessed value of a home with an ADU is gonna be higher than one without. So, yeah, there's gonna be
I will s-
impacts.
And with our stretch energy code, from a builder standpoint, I would much rather somebody say, hey, I want to do a detached. I'd be like, on it. Because if it touches your house and I have to now, I improve 100 square feet of that main house to connect it properly and have common space, now I hit the 1,000-foot threshold under the stretch energy code. Now I have to bring your house up to the new stretch energy code. So I don't want to do attached. If you tell me you want to do attached, I'm probably going to say, what do we think about detached? Just being honest.
How is that defined? Is that
1,000 square feet.
no, I understand the 1,000 square foot, but the ADU is in addition to the square footage of the existing home?
It's
Does
its
that-
own unit, but if you start renovating the existing home to tie them together and you disturb more than 100 feet of that existing home, that's when, but if it was a garage, if it was unconditioned space that now you're making conditioned for, then
Because
it doesn't.
the requirement
only
is that
requires
that if you hit that
conditioned space.
1,000-foot threshold, then you've got to apply the stretch energy code to the entire home.
Yes.
Which is probably why it's 900 square feet by the state law.
No,
Yeah.
I think that was, other states have it at 900 as well, 'cause I researched it. But because I emailed them about the stretch energy code as well. And they said only if you're converting conditioned space and if you're renovating that conditioned space is when that would trigger the stretch energy code for that, the ADU as well as the house.
And what's conditioned space?
Conditioned space would be anything other than your garage or basement, like.
Living space.
Living space. So if it's not heated, it's not conditioned space.
Okay.
And
As
how
long as
does
you don't
this,
touch the existing house, you just create the ADU.
Pretty much. Well, you can do up to 100 square feet.
If you just put a doorway between
Yeah.
the new and the old
Yeah.
part of the house,
That
then you
entryway,
didn't,
you
right.
just touch, you put a door
You
on
make
it.
Then
a
you're
99
okay.
square foot
Right.
entryway.
If we make a common space that's unconditioned that then goes into the two, then you're really not affecting that either. You're not hitting the 1,000 square feet of conditioned space to trigger the stretch energy code.
Okay, so for the sake of what we want to draft, so no additional ADU by special permit to start, right? Everyone's in agreement on that?
yeah,
And then what was the second thing we talked about?
So we should have site plan.
Site plan is not required. Let's just make site plan not required for the first draft.
Do you want it for detached ADUs or just not required at all?
Can we do like a streamlined site plan review for detached?
Not requiring stormwater management and things like that. But how do you define that?
I didn't quite hear the first part of that.
Like, is there a way to make a streamlined or like like when we do a minor modification? Like something like that for a site plan review for a detached?
Well, that still would require a public hearing and for them to come in and present before the planning board. I don't know. It's up to the board.
Well, it does say the required amount of parking is spelled out in here as well. And the building department will have to make sure that they have adequate parking and access to
And
it.
the building code will require the fire department to get involved with smoke certs and things like that. So, parts of some of the concerns around those issues are taken up by the building code.
And it will have to meet all current setbacks.
That's what I was gonna say, so we're less concerned about it because we're not making any changes to the setbacks for
Right.
a detached ADU.
Yeah.
what about garage space and accessory, like space on a 900 square foot living? Because I could build a 900 square foot living space and 15,000 feet of warehouse space.
That's the conditioned
I think where
space,
they
right?
limit you to, 900 square feet,
Of living space.
however you carve it up. If you have 800 square feet of a garage and the rest is your living space, I suppose that's your choice. But, no, you're not gonna have the ADU with a garage and with a shed, et cetera. But I would say that, put it in the bylaw, if that's a concern, that, the ADU shall not have any additional accessory structures. I think that's reasonable. Now, you might feel differently when we start talking about things like, well, they should be allowed to have a modest shed for, trash and recycling or something like that, because we don't just want them putting them outside. We want it to be sort of, sheltered, so to speak. Okay.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, that's where, that's called, we call
But
that.
then if you're
we
putting
call
it,
that
building a
engineering.
garage and doing the ADU above it, Now, you're gonna tell them they can't have the garage.
No, the garage is part of
Don't look
the
at me like that.
primary.
If the garage was
talking-
already
I just
there,
got
it was
one
part of the
approved in
principal
another town
dwelling.
with an 1,100 square foot garage attached to the 900 square feet.
Right. I'm not saying you can't do that. I'm just saying, are we actually thinking about possibilities of that, right?
Well, why wouldn't
'Cause-
the garage be part of the primary residence? Whoever can park in there, but.
Exactly. So that's what I'm saying, like, even if it's an ADU, like, you can't say they can't have the garage attached, because that's unconditioned space. Unless, like, we have a lot coverage,
Yeah.
so we could have, like, floor area ratio to lot size, which a lot of cities and stuff have, which is good as well.
I was just about to say, can we have something that says how much of a lot can be covered with?
Yeah, so lot
sheds,
coverage
pool houses,
or
Lot coverage will limit
ADU,
you.
primary-
Yeah, we already do that.
We do?
Yeah,
even 30%, right?
I think so. So we would default to our current lot coverage requirements.
Okay.
The only way it gets, like, if you have a large, couple acre lot, now you have the ability to cover more.
Yeah.
Hence, I'm building a 2,000 square foot, 900 living square.
So one other thought to bear in mind is, if somebody did take advantage of the existing ADU by special permit, and I don't know how many there might be, or if somebody, I think I heard earlier, no one has ever applied for the affordable accessory apartment bylaw?
I think we've had one.
Okay. Do you want to prohibit, if you've got a principal dwelling and have an ADU by right, they cannot have, well, not only just an additional ADU, but they also cannot have this affordable accessory apartment. If we're getting rid of the affordable accessory apartment, that's really not an issue. But think about the other types of, similar to the, well, how many accessory structures do you want them to allow? Are there other types of accessory uses that we allow now that we want to make sure are not being piggybacked on? Like some communities will have like a guest house and a pool house and a detached bedroom, and, you'd be amazed at what people actually cram into a zoning bylaw and what they call them. Well, how many of these things are we going to have on a lot before somebody says enough is enough? So, and usually it's things like lot coverage or impervious surface coverage maximums that will limit all of that, but it might bear repeating that if you've got a principal dwelling, you have an ADU, you cannot also have one of these other uses. Something else you might want to think about is for the person who currently has like the affordable accessory dwelling unit, do we want to do some kind of outreach about converting that? They might feel at this point that they are locked in, but because of a 15-year deed restriction or something, and maybe we leave well enough alone, or maybe we also recognize that somebody who has that accessory use now could come in, turn it into a by right ADU, and that's the end of the deed restriction.
Terminate the deed restriction.
That sometimes happens on its own.
Exactly. So the only other question too was, if you want to put a prohibition against using an ADU as a short-term rental.
It doesn't seem consistent with the reason for the ADUs by right. It doesn't seem in the same spirit of why it was created.
I think that that's true based on what the legislature, what their goals certainly have been. If
But we
it's-
don't seem to have a lot of short-term rentals either. I mean,
know.
like, we don't seem to have an issue with it. We're not
What defines short-term?
Airbnb.
Airbnbs, yeah.
I think we don't have
If there was
hotels
like
in
that'd be
town
like a
either,
one-year
so
lease or something.
Sorry,
I don't know.
I'm indifferent on it.
I'd say maybe the market takes care of it. We'll see if there's anything there. I know people have concerns about short-term rentals being bothersome to neighbors. You never know who's going to be there. Sometimes there's noise problems, things like that. That I totally get.
How about we flip the look of this thought here, because I could build an ADU and rent it to myself and then make my house a short-term rental.
Yeah, you could.
Yep.
Yeah, they don't need to be owner occupied either, you could rent all of the structures.
Yeah.
You don't even rent it, you don't even live in the ADU, you could live in.
Yeah, you can
Brockton.
live
You can
out of
live
state
anywhere.
entirely and
Yeah.
just own the
Yeah.
house and the ADU, right, and rent them both out, right.
But we're still
Um,
making housing.
But the primary residence doesn't have to be owner occupied?
The legislature eliminated the owner-occupied requirement that a lot of communities, like Pembroke, have in place.
Wow.
So I
That
think
means
the
it-
offset to that was, but you can prohibit short-term rentals for
Right.
kind of precisely that reason. That if there are lots of people
Right.
and they're, having wild parties and smashing windows or
Wow.
driving across your driveway or whatever, you might not have that if the owner is
Isn't
in
there.
the unit
Right.
right next door, but if they're not there,
Very support.
Wow, though, this is like, wow, because, from a business standpoint, you've created an opportunity for someone to turn a property into a full-fledged business, right?
Yeah. Black Rock.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, yeah.
Or you're providing an opportunity for someone to generate passive income in their retirement
Right.
Yeah, no, I.
off of
yeah,
an asset
yeah,
that
yeah.
they've paid for
Yeah, I know.
over many years.
There's multiple looks on every situation.
And we did allow basically short-term rentals at the country club.
Well, that's allowed, because that's the nature of it, yeah. What the nature of that is.
We did it in a building, though, not all the
And a
other
supervised building with
Right.
management on site at all times,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's a little different.
But anyway, all
It's
right,
it's a good question. I think like you, I go back and forth on it. Part of me says, yeah, why not let that happen and see, if things get out of hand, then people aren't gonna do it anymore because they don't want their property destroyed either. Right? They'll
Well, I
stop
think
doing
there's
it.
a range of an owner not wanting their property destroyed and a nuisance disturbance to neighbors.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think there's like a range of things that could happen, and obviously the.
Well, one has to happen before the other.
Right, well, I'm saying, so we could create an example, an instance where we're creating nuisances to neighbors, but not necessarily a detriment to the
yeah,
homeowner.
I just feel.
I don't know, I don't know where, like.
I'm just
I
doing the
need to
math
think
on
about
this
it.
in my head, and it doesn't achieve what I would want to be achieving. In other words, this doesn't really facilitate low-income housing.
well,
Because-
it's not supposed to
It's not, that's not the
generate
reason
Not
for
really.
it.
So
low-income
point out.
housing,
Yeah.
just
Housing.
alternative, more affordable housing,
Yeah,
in theory.
yeah. In theory. It doesn't hold up with me for some reason. Because I'm seeing my creative mind is seeing opportunity. Because I would tell anyone before selling your house, build an ADU and rent it. Because now the person who buys your house is gonna buy it and get an income with the property. So then you can raise the price that you sell it for. So it instantly takes.
But that happens now.
Yeah, it does. I know.
So just one thought on the short-term rental aspect, and I hear you saying, well, maybe we just see how it plays out and see if it becomes a problem. If you adopt a new ADU bylaw and you build in that it cannot be used as a short-term rental from the very beginning, it's easier to then lift that restriction at some point in the future if it isn't a problem. The opposite is not as easy, because with zoning, as you all know, every time you change a zoning bylaw, anybody that had a lawfully existing use prior to the zoning change can continue. So if we just adopt an ADU bylaw and we don't prohibit short-term rentals, and say 5 or 6 years down the line, everybody's saying, oh my God, it's like living next door to, Animal House or whatever. You can change the bylaw to now prohibit,
But their use still continues.
but they're gonna argue, yes, that they, are permitted to continue
Well,
because
I
they
think
have
they'd
all
say
along.
not have one.
And I honestly don't think you're gonna hinder too much. I can't see many people trying to stay in an Airbnb in Pembroke.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't think we're hurting any major part of our town by doing that either.
And that's just for the ADU, right? I mean, we still allow short-term rentals in Pembroke, don't we?
We don't have anything.
We don't have
against
anything
it.
against it.
Do you have at least a registration, like through the Board of Health or anything like that, that they have to register and only so
No,
many
and
people?
I think that
Yeah.
should be, I think we should have that.
Not to my knowledge, I don't know.
Yeah,
I could break that up, bylaw review, and add it to town
Yeah.
bylaws.
I think we should, because, you know, in essence, it's just a public safety thing in my mind. You know, if you're gonna have regular turnout of different people coming into your property, I mean,
that's why in most communities, it's been done through the Board of Health. And every time someone has a turn, they have to register with the Board of Health. They might even limit how many each individual or corporation can actually hold in a community. And they do the inspections for, sanitation and safety purposes, so you
Yeah.
do get that. And there's usually a fee attached to it, so it's revenue generating in some respects for the town, but not break the budget there.
I would actually argue
All
that.
right, so we feel that we should prohibit it in the ADU bylaw, and then let the general bylaws take up that question on short-term rentals overall.
See what for and conflict or-
Yeah. Does that make sense?
Any thoughts on limiting the amount of property somebody could own in town for short-term rentals? Not the ADUs? I
That,
think
yeah, the ADU would be separate from anything that the bylaw committee would consider about short-term rentals.
Townwide, yes.
Townwide.
Yes.
Because that would be bylaws.
Right, but you're
rather
saying
than
some,
zoning bylaw.
some communities limit, like I can't own more than 20
Right,
in the town.
right.
Do we want to put a number on that, or do we not? I don't think it's going to be a huge, I don't think anyone's coming to the
Well,
town
that
to buy
would be a
two.
town bylaw.
We
Yeah,
won't-
I would do that as a general bylaw, and I
Right.
would have it go
So it
through the
wouldn't go
Board of
under
Health,
zoning.
but yes,
Under
yeah.
our purview.
You could put limits like that in place, yep. But you can still outright prohibit an ADU from being used as a short-term rental.
And we could do that, you know,
Yeah.
first and see if there's a demand. If there's a huge demand and people clamoring for it, then we may consider reconsidering.
Okay.
Hmm?
All right,
Stefan?
so do you want me to revise this based on some of the consensus this evening and can revisit it another time, or?
Yeah. We're gonna need something for town meeting, so.
Right,
Yeah,
And when is town?
May, but the warrant closes, I'm not sure exactly when the warrant closes,
The
but
warrant opens the 3rd.
of February?
Yes, and closes the 14th of February.
Of February.
Close.
Okay, so we're,
we got plenty of time to get to a revised draft, and if you decide to change your mind on some of this stuff, we can revise it again.
okay.
What about, what about all the utility aspects of an ADU? You know, but if you say 900 square feet, does that mean I'm taking up part of that 900 square feet with my hot water heater and furnace? And,
They could run off the existing houses, hot water and furnace, right? Like, it doesn't say they have to have separate. It could be at the discretion of the homeowner.
Yeah,
Right, if it were attached is what you're thinking. I'm sorry,
If it's
detached
attached.
rather. If it
but
was
even,
attached,
even,
utilize-
but even detached, they,
Each one's gonna have its own
Right.
obstacles to
Right.
come,
There'll be a mechanic.
to deal with. You know, you're gonna have to have a mechanical room, or whether it's an attic space, basement, garage space, or if it's gonna be in conditioned space, like,
okay.
you know, like, I'm doing one in Norwell where there was an old well that we're using for the water supply. We're not tying into the homeowner's water supply.
I think the electrical's gonna start to, we're adding 900 square feet to people who's already used all 200 amps of their service. And what they end up using.
well, they gotta change it.
What if the key pumps are taking a lot of energy?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
People are gonna need 400 amp service before you
Yeah.
know it, anyway.
Exactly.
We want everything to be electric under the state, under our strict energy code, so that takes more than our 200 amp service.
Yeah, those are decisions the homeowner's gonna have to make.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay.
So So you want to move on to the other
Yeah.
zoning amendment? Okay.
Yeah.
So this really was generated by you folks, looking to increase to decrease lot size and also to reduce the front yard where it's currently
Setbacks.
requires 40 feet to 30. Yes. So I looked at this, and as I said to Susan, I don't have any issue with this. This is really a policy decision for the board. If you want, when we go in the opposite direction where we suddenly increase lot size or we increase setbacks, then we know we're creating some nonconformities along the way. Decreasing lot size or decreasing setbacks, I don't really see that it's going to impact very many people. And if you think it makes more sense, then I defer to the wisdom of the board.
When did we come up with this? Can you just refresh my memory?
Yeah, Heather.
I
had to ask that question
yeah.
too.
Yeah, we came up with this out of the master plan. This is clearly a part of the master plan for land use. And if you look at our land use, we have put enormous amounts of land into open space and conservation. So there's restrictions on a lot of the open space currently left in Pembroke. Right now, we've got about 400 acres that could be developed. It's not much. Of those 400, we don't know how many of them are wet. You have restrictions, or not restrictions, but you have to require infrastructure for subdivisions, requiring roads and stormwater. So there's not a lot of acreage left to build on. And if we're looking for growth to help our school budgets and our general budget over time, we need to have a certain percentage of growth over what we get by levying 2.5 to sustain what we have now. And there's a housing shortage. So, and 20,000 square foot lots are big lots, they're half-acre lots. We're not looking to add, a lot of postage stamp sized lots in doing this. Now, I would think there may be a lot of trepidation about this. We'll see. I'm willing to get a draft bylaw, which is relatively simple, and get it before the advisory committee. And I did talk to the bylaw committee, just because I wanted to get it in front of them and get some reaction. We may get some pushback on it, and we'll see at town meeting. This would require a 2/3 vote. The ADUs don't, right, as per the law?
ADUs by right do not do not require a 2/3 vote, it'd be a majority vote.
Yeah.
Certain ADUs by special permit
Would require the
would be,
2/3.
it depends what you ultimately decide to do with
Okay.
some of the tweaking. But by and large, it would still, if we allow an ADU in attached and detached dwellings by special permit, even that would be a majority vote.
Okay, but this is a
But if you keep
change.
owner occupied or things like
Yeah.
that in, no.
But the difference here is this is just a general zoning bylaw under the town of Pembroke, and that requires a 2/3 vote at
Correct.
town meeting.
Yes.
So, it's in the master plan that we're looking to get more opportunities for housing. It's the only engine of growth that we have. That's it. If you look at the last 20 years, 30% of land use has gone into open space and conservation. About 2.5% has gone to residential, and we lost about 1.5 to 2% in business use. So this is it. We're at build-out. And we don't have very much further to go.
And Heather, we had a planning board subcommittee, so we went
Yeah.
over some of the stuff, the action plan. And
So
we-
I have one major concern. Well, I have a few concerns, but this is the one that comes to my mind most quickly, is we use existing dimensions for things like the cluster housing up at the golf course, which hasn't been built out yet. Could they come back and revise their plan based on this, and instead of almost double the number of lots they're
They
putting in
can't
there?
come back, they
They haven't
couldn't,
started anything.
No,
I
but
get
they-
that.
Cluster's actually,
yeah, but
cluster's actually doing better than this.
Well, they had to do the initial plan for the number
No,
of
that's a good
units.
point.
Like,
Yeah.
Yes.
So however, I forget the exact.
No, that's
an
how many
excellent-
numbers-
yeah, yeah,
that's-
So all of a sudden, that number could be 1.5 times what it is.
Oh,
that's
yeah,
right. You're
absolutely.
absolutely right.
Yeah,
So
you're right.
Yes.
that's like my concern, is that changing, not so much changing you know, you're gonna build one house here on a street that can accommodate it, like,
Yeah.
that's not my concern. My concern is that we use this as a calculation for other things.
Sure.
And that modifying that could have a significant impact.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
That would be
Well,
a huge.
but they
impact.
couldn't go back and redo their plans based on this change,
Yeah.
because it wasn't, it didn't exist at the time that they filed and got all their approvals.
But they would have to go through the approval process again.
Again, yes.
If they can do 1.5 times the number of units,
Right.
it might make sense.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, it might not make sense from a market perspective to do that with their project.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Well, people may not want to have twice as many units in that cluster zone.
Right. But,
No, I think
well, they
what she-
haven't,
I
there's
think
no
what
people
she's
who
saying
like,
is, they could go all the way back to the first step
yeah,
and say,
how
"Oh,
many units can we
instead of
have?
172,
Two.
we can now do 340.
And they could be buildings, they don't have to be standalone. I mean, that's my, because when I read this, that was my concern, was that
Well,
it's a calculation.
what about existing cul-de-sac?
Well, because that's
With
why when we did it, we
frontage.
didn't cut the frontage in half.
Right.
We did
That saves
100
you.
feet, so that way,
That's
people
why
that
it's
are
not
maximizing in a subdivision, you're getting that 150, like, to the nose, like, a lot of properties have
And we did
150.
talk about that, if you had 200 feet of frontage, and you had a 40,000 square foot lot, and you could get with the setbacks all done right, you could get another lot there, single-family housing lot, yes, we'd let you do it.
But if it's non-conforming, if it's gonna make that house now non-conforming, we wouldn't
We
allow it.
wouldn't allow it.
Because it would have to come in front of us.
Right.
Yeah.
To get that approval.
So in the cluster zoning bylaw, we could change that to reflect 40,000 square foot lots. Because it's not like you still can't do 40,000 square foot lots. You can still do 40,000 square foot lots, if that's the housing that you want to build. The other way to do this would be an overlay zone. So we would allow 20,000 square foot. It's 40,000 and 20. They do this in
Yeah.
Kingston.
Yeah, I like the idea of an overlay, a little better. I don't know
So-
where, I haven't looked at it.
So Kingston has, you can do 40,000, there are zones where you can do 40,000 or 20,000 square foot lots.
And 80,000.
And 80,000, yep. Depending on how you engineer the land.
They had a lot more open land than we did.
They did,
And they have multiple zones where we have like basically one residential.
Right.
And we're fair across the town. And there's already so many neighborhoods that have, I mean, I have less than a quarter of an acre in my neighborhood, like our ranch houses, like we don't, I have a non-conforming 40,000 square foot lot, you know, so my yard's perfect.
Damn you.
I like my size, it's perfect. Like that quarter of
So-
an acre, it's easy to maintain.
should we look at the cluster zone and see if we need to amend that as well, concurrent with this?
If you're concerned that,
See, one
this
reason why I'm not,
situation, yes, I would.
I'm not as concerned is because this is a fully baked plan that they've got, they're ready to go, and they went through an awful lot to do it.
it's a lot of money
Well, a
to
lot
throw
of
out
the-
the window
And
to
it's a
start
lot,
over again.
it's a lot of money to
Yeah.
throw out the window and
If
start
you
over
get
again.
twice as many, and I know it's the 150 to 100 is where you're limiting it. It's not the rest of it is kind of, that's the limiting factor, is the frontage.
Is the frontage.
You know, and where there's no roads, so they're creating no roads, so there'd be a lot of,
Yeah.
like you could, if you could all of a sudden fit almost twice as many dwellings up at the country club, it might be worth it.
Well,
We just sat here and said that we're doing
we-
this because
we-
of demand of housing.
Yeah,
Like-
but that project is very different than a lot of other projects. However, if you want to talk to Bristol about that, we could talk to Bristol about that. Say, if we did this, would you go and do that? The other thing is you need 30 or more acres for the cluster zoning. There are not very many
Right.
There's like
places in Pembroke. There's,
that.
yeah, there's like 2.
And
That
I
would be,
own one of them and I'm not doing it.
that would be over 30 acres. That would be eligible for the cluster zoning. So, I mean, it's a good point to make, and we could look at the cluster zoning bylaw and say just quite plainly, it requires 40,000 square feet and 150 foot of frontage for the calculation,
That's- yeah.
and make that change too.
'Cause
And I don't
you
think
would-
the ADU would apply to that Pembroke Country Club development, because they're on a fixed septic system.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, they couldn't add it. And they're 55 and over too.
Well, I think it
And
took,
limited bedrooms.
I
for
think it
that.
took everything they could do to get the septic to work for the 172 units. Doubling them, they wouldn't be able to do it at all.
Yeah.
That's a
Right.
good point. But they might be able to have.
Anyway, this
more
is, it's a lot.
Buildings
It's a lot.
with-
Without more data. I
Well,
would
no,
like
they're
more
also,
data.
but they're also limited to where, because they've already taken up the amount of space they're allowed under the
Right.
cluster zone. They can't add buildings because then they don't meet the calculation
If
of the
you-
open space that needs to be left.
Okay, so if you took 8 of the single-family dwellings and merged those into one building, you might be able to fit 16 units in there. So there may be more units, not necessarily more dwellings on the land.
Yeah, but again, they've got to comply with all septic.
Right.
Right.
And
They would spend a lot of money to redo that. I can't imagine them doing
It isn't
that.
just, I mean, it goes to the calculation for the cluster housing. Like, I don't think they're gonna change what they're doing, they've got a great plan. But it concerns me that this is changing the calculation for future. And there may only be I mean, I think there's more than 2 pieces of land with over 30 acres. But,
it's not a lot. Maybe it's more than 2, but may not be more than 4.
but, you know, and that's today, like, people can merge that's today. That's not saying that going forward, there's always gonna be 2.
So we could add that to the cluster,
Yeah.
saying it has to stay at,
I
you
think
know,
that's a minimum.
the build-out of
Based on
40,000
40,000 square foot lots
Yeah.
as your base density.
with
Yeah.
150 foot of frontage.
150 foot of frontage.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, if this changes, I think.
We would kind of have to put them both on the warrant at the same time.
We would.
So technically, one could pass and one might not, like, or they both.
Right.
Like, you have to always have that as a thought, too.
That's right. You have to
Well,
go-
it
go
doesn't
town
really
meeting and
change
go.
the cluster zoning bylaw, though. It just makes it explicit that the 40,000 square foot and 150 foot of frontage is required, right? So even if one didn't pass, this didn't pass and that passed, it really just helps the bylaw be more,
It allowed, yeah, and this. could
Explicit.
change.
Yeah.
If you modified it in the future.
so.
Yeah.
Okay. Take a look at that. I think
That
that's
it?
all I had.
That's good. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'll get a revised draft to you folks well before the close of the warrant, don't worry.
Yeah, we'll have to hold public hearings as well, so.
I was expecting a December date, thinking, okay, that might be tight, but February, we'll have it to you in early January. How's that?
Thank you.
All right, thank you folks.
Thank you.
So for those of you who may be wondering out there, there will be public hearings on both of these, which are required before we can vote at town meeting. All right. Next on the agenda is review of routine administrative matters and a vote to accept the minutes of recent board meetings.
So,
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion to accept the minutes from Monday, November 4th, 2024,
Do I have a
as
second?
written.
second?
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
There we
It's
go.
unanimous. Any other motions to be made?
I'd like to make a motion that our late arrival signs the document over there.
Don't need a motion for that, but I'll accept another motion.
Motion to adjourn?
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, we're done.
Sign the paper over